I teach classes for old people having sex. I mean really old people having sex, like 80s or so. Because old people do have sex. And if they're not having sex, they're probably thinking about it, wondering about it, and desiring some form of human connection and intimacy. In one of the classes I was teaching recently, and by the way, I focus on older adults, 50s and older, and the staff who work with them in senior living communities. So in one of these classes, an aide, he was probably about 20, 25, he assumed that the couple in his facility who sleep in twin beds with a nightstand between them aren't having sex. Well, you never know. Maybe she's afraid of his sharp toenails and prefers to sleep alone. Maybe he doesn't like the way she hogs the covers and prefers to sleep without a fight. Maybe they've both agreed to have sex in the later part of the morning, after a good night's sleep, and before their meds wear off. You're probably thinking, oh, I can't talk about this kind of stuff. Sex and old people? It's inappropriate. It's gross. Grandma having sex? It's downright horrifying. But if we can't imagine this life for our elders, if we can't begin to talk, and by the way, the talk means we have to really consider some difficult conversations like the prospect of dementia, which really complicates the conversation further, then we're denying our elders lives of dignity and pleasure at a time when they need every possible reason to live. As a sexuality educator, I teach about sex, literally the ins and outs of sex in all its forms. And I'm not just talking about heterosexual intercourse. I'm talking about the wide and varied ways that we as human beings have continued to enrich and enhance throughout millennia. Intimacy and sensuality, desire and response, sexual health and reproduction, identity and attraction, sexual lives, and abuse and consent. I came to this work later in life, having finished my PhD at the age of 62. Thank you. And while many of the other students were contemplating sex ed careers with younger populations, I realized that older adults were living longer, loving longer, and their sexual lives were considered taboo. Not only did this appeal to me because they were underrepresented in the literature, but it was my own future too. I did my practicum with Dr. Laura Magdoff Singer at Kittay House, an independent living community in the Bronx. She's been a psychotherapist, a sex therapist, and a pioneer in marriage and family therapy for over 50 years. And she just celebrated her 100th birthday. She's got intellectual vitality, a sense of humor, and great style. One day before one of her sessions, she pulled me aside and she gestured to one of the men in her group and she said, "He's having a very difficult time right now emotionally." And she explained that his wife had just been transferred to an Alzheimer's unit. He loved her very much, he missed her, and he really, really was longing. Now, I've got to admit, and I'm a little ashamed to say, that it wasn't until that moment, that exact moment, that I realized that older adults have complex and deep emotional lives just as younger people do. How had I not realized this as I had begun to do this work in sexuality education? Sure, I had grown up with many older relatives and older adults in my life, but I had never considered their deep emotional lives, their longings, sense of loss, sense of pleasure, sense of jealousy, sense of sadness. And it made me wonder, why is it that old people have so much wisdom and young people so much power? The questions I ask myself today are echoed in the voices of people I teach. Is my pelvic floor dropping? Is an adult diaper in my future? Does a drop in estrogen mean that I'm resigned to finding stray facial hairs each morning? Is this my new normal? And what do we know about older adult sexuality? The Harvard study of adult development has been tracking the same group of individuals since 1938. And among their many findings, one of the most fascinating results is that the one thing that brings people the most happiness in life is connection, relationships. Now, they're not talking about sexual relationships. I'll get to that in just a moment. But they found that the people who had the most positive relationships at age 50 were the happiest at age 80. Now, the sexuality researchers have looked at very interesting worlds around sexual relationships. Dr. John Delamutter, one of our most eminent sex researchers, found that older adults are having and enjoying sex right through to their 80s. Many sexuality researchers before him had looked only at the medical issues like medications, hormonal changes, chronic disease, chronic pain, which didn't really speak to the full human experience. What he and his colleagues found was that the three influences of the stirrings in the loins of older adults were good physical and mental health, access to a sexual partner, and a positive attitude about sex. Now, most of these researchers have looked at primarily heterosexual relationships. In my own research on same-sex relationships with older adults, I found that positive relationships were directly connected to sexual satisfaction. So what is all this research saying? Well, older adults are doing it. They're having fun doing it, and it's good for their health. So why are we putting an expiration date on their sexual lives just because they're old? You know the adage, youth is wasted on the young. Well, among the benefits of growing old are precisely the ingredients needed for a full and deep sexual life. Authenticity, openness, and a real appreciation for connection. If we begin to allow older adults to live full human experience, then we will ultimately be making room for our own sexual journeys. Now, what we know about young adults' sexuality and their challenges is legion. It's been well documented, thought about, and projected onto large and small screens. What do we know about older adults' sexual challenges? Well, we know that the inner lining of the vaginal canal can become thinner and less lubricated, causing pain with friction. We know that erections may be slower or non-existent. We know that dementia and other cognitive impairments may severely alter personality. Consider some of the situations that I've encountered in my teaching. A family member who's concerned that his mother's new boyfriend is out to fleece her, even though she's head over heels in love. The unmarried interracial couple who's afraid to take their relationship to the next level because other residents in their building look askance at them every time they're seen holding hands in public. Or the transgender woman who's afraid to be herself because her senior housing has just been bought out by a conservative religious organization. One woman wanted to know how to have sex with her husband now that his penis no longer gets erect. She asked, how do I begin to bring a vibrator into my bed after 50 years of marriage? Another woman who had just lost her husband of 67 years wondered aloud about the possibility of a relationship with another woman because of the scarcity of men in her life. Such brave questions, and they deserve to be dignified because of their courage and their honesty. And before I launch into any solutions, I listen with an open heart because I'm grateful, not just for the questions, but because of the hope behind those questions. Now, I offer people the latest research, accessible resources, tools. For instance, for painful intercourse, I like to use the term outer course, which refers to any sexual behavior that creates pleasure without penetration. For dementia, we need assessments and consults and conversations around boundaries and consent and sexual function. Older adults need to be seen as living full sexual lives. And I believe that every one of us deserves to have sexual freedom of any class, disability, ethnicity, gender identity, nationality, political persuasion, race, religion, orientation, or age. Now, we need to take a public health approach to this idea of curious and consenting older adults interested in full and complete sexual lives. Right now, the responsibility often falls on individual staff members, even though everyone in a senior living community knows that elders are having sex, administrators, staff members, family members. But it's unfair to leave that responsibility for on-the-spot decisions to a staff member who might inadvertently walk in on elders having sex. It means that their individual values will prevail in any given moment. We need a wider lens. I'm talking about leadership here. And very few of these communities have a consistent and clear understanding of sexual freedom and sexual expression. Let me give you an example of two people, Jan and Alex. Jan was 92 and Alex was 95 when they met and fell in love in assisted living. They were both diagnosed with dementia. One day, while taking a private moment, a sexual moment in the privacy of Alex's bed, Alex's son walked in on them and was enraged. He beseeched the staff to never allow the two of them to be alone together again. He quickly took Alex out of the community. Jan stopped eating. Jan lost 21 pounds, was diagnosed with depression and dehydration. And Jan sat alone at the window every day waiting for Alex to return. This is heartbreaking stuff. And it could have been avoided. Avoided with hard conversations, difficult conversations. If only someone had talked with the staff members, the family member, or the couple themselves. And that if only those conversations had led to conversations about shared values that were translated into organizational policies that led to training and education for staff, family, and residents. I'm calling for leadership willing to tackle taboo topics, like looking at their culture, their environment, their policies, their resident rights. Leaders willing to be open and inclusive of sexual expression of a wide variety, along with privacy. You know, senior living communities have policies about almost everything, My brother just sent me one about how much matzo ball soup you can take home from the dining hall. And yet, there's one glaring omission. Very few communities have a policy around sexual expression that covers health and safety and consent and boundaries. Perhaps the greatest secret of all is that older adults have longing and lust. So let's take a page out of another successful movement. Just as those rainbow stickers and flags signify that it's safe for lesbian, gay, bi, trans, and queer people, what if we had our own sticker right there on the front plate glass door of a senior living community that proclaimed that community as sex-friendly, meaning that a wide array of sexual expression would be welcome, would be safe, would be healthy there. While you're out shopping for a senior living community for your parents or your grandparents, you'd know that their sexual expression was safe. How we begin to untangle these challenges will have implications for all of us. Let's write that future together. Grandmas today and tomorrow will be grateful. Thank you. Wow.